For those of you who watch me on a regular basis, since the NFL, the Major League Baseball, and NBA can schedule during an off season for the next season, why do we need to schedule college football games 10 and 13 years in advance? But now the Pac-12's got it down to like inside 48 hours. And so we saw that last weekend with UCLA and Cal. Now we've got Oregon and UCLA playing sometime on Saturday, we think. We got our Rian Winter on the line. Does a tremendous job here on YouTube tracking Oregon football and doing it from a bit of a different vantage point. So you got to check out his channel at Super Chat 503. Rian, how you doing today?
Hey, great, Mark. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. So Oregon's at 2-0. We'll get to the football on the field and what they produced in just a second. But in regards to this UCLA game against old friend Chip Kelly, I think you had the best analogy via Chip Kelly, and so I'll let you throw it out there in regards to the game time.
Right. Well, they're scheduling this game. They did push back a day because they had to reschedule the other game to a Sunday. And so Chip, they asked him, they said it's like the cable man, sometime between 12 and 7. Don't really know when you're going to play. But I think this year is just so strange. I think everything's up in the air and you got to be flexible.
Absolutely. So we do have 2 Oregon wins in the books against Stanford and against Washington State, a game that was a bit sloppy there in the first half. Wazoo hit you up for some big plays. The Ducks turned it over 3 times, but pulled it together. Tyler Shook had a nice game. CJ Verdell ran for big numbers as well. Your thoughts about the Ducks last week against the Cougs?
Yeah, I mean, Cougs always tough place to play. Up there, Pullman, we were lucky to get it early in the season. This season, obviously being pushed back, but it's still in November. Anything goes up there. We avoided the snow, which is nice, but it's always a tough place to play. And, Washington State's been really on the uptick the last 5 years, with Leach. Now with Leach leaving, there was some real question marks about how Rolovich was going to have this team playing this year, but they came out pretty good, and I was kind of impressed when I watched the Beeve game first week and then with Washington State's win. And then coming into this game, I thought Oregon was going to win it, but maybe not the 2-touchdown favorite that I thought they were going to be. Maybe it was a little closer, but they did. They hit us for some real big plays over the top, passing the ball. The freshman quarterback up there looks really good, and their defense is better than expected. They have the speed D still there, and they make a lot of plays.
For anybody who has not watched Justin Herbert at the next level, don't look at the Chargers record. Forget that. Just watch the kid play. And when I say kid, he's not a kid. That's just an old man that is going back to his habits of calling all these guys kids. But man, he can play and he's delivering. So no Justin Herbert. People wondering, obviously, going into this season, what kind of loss that would be. And Tyler Shook's performance through 2 games, your assessment.
Oh, Tyler looks great. And I think also, you got to have Coach Moorhead in there. Having a new offensive coordinator made a real big difference. Last year with Herbert, you knew he was going to be one of the top picks in the NFL draft for the quarterbacks. They said he could have come out after his junior year, came back for his senior year, but all the clamor was against the offensive coordinator last year. It felt like they were tied, the hands were tied for Herbert. They really didn't extend the ball. They didn't throw the ball deep. They didn't take advantage of his arm. And Moorhead's doing the exact opposite. Moorhead's throwing the ball deep when he needs to, but he's also running the ball with Shuck. I think that's a big difference, is that last year they did not want to get Herbert hurt. They didn't run the ball with him. So any of that read option stuff was pretty easy to pick up on. And the running game for Oregon is so good that you have to be able to key on that if you're a defensive player. So you're going to have the open lane if you're a quarterback and you decide to pull it.
As I mentioned off the top, I watched bits and pieces of the game in condensed fashion against Wazoo. Big plays in giving up 19 points in the first half, and then things tightened up there for the Ducks on defense. Your thoughts on the Ducks on that side of the ball?
Well, defensively, it's actually the side of the ball we were the most excited about this year. A little bit of depth issues coming into it with some of the guys opting out to go to the NFL. And then there's been some guys who haven't been able to play, who have been inactive. And again, sometimes we don't know if that's COVID inactive or other sort of things inactive. But we've had some guys with some depth issues. So there was some second stringers playing on that game. And it's bound to happen. Washington State's going to score some points. But I do think the defensive front of Oregon is going to keep them in it. I think the linebacker core is really good. Had had some really bad news yesterday about the number one linebacker freshman who came in, Justin Flo, with a meniscus tear. He's out for the season, but he hadn't really played as much as the other freshman, Noah Sewell, Penei Sewell's younger brother, who's getting a lot of playing time up front. Number one is making a lot of plays. So Kayvon Thibodeau was the guy. We knew he was going to make a lot of tackles. Nick Pickett in the backfield has made a lot of tackles, although he has been exposed at times a little bit. But, the defense is coming around. I think the hardest thing for the COVID this year was defensive players not being able to tackle in the offseason. And Andy Avalos, the defensive coordinators, talked about that tackling is really, if you watch across the country, tackling is the one thing that's really been hurting this year.
Yeah, but not necessarily for Noah Sewell, as you mentioned. He's third on the team in tackles right now and also has a sack. So instant contribution from him.
He looks the part. I mean, real deal. And I had Penei on my show, Sports Chat 503. I had Penei on earlier this summer, and I asked him about his younger brother. And I kind of envision that whole family is all D1 athletes, and this is the youngest brother. So I'm imagining him as a very young kid playing in the yard with all his brothers, him being the quarterback or the running back, trying to run away from all these guys, trying to tackle him. So he was a star player in high school, was a running back, was a quarterback, just did about everything. I think this kid could punt and possibly even return punts. I think he's that effective.
Got Ryan Winter on the line. Check out his YouTube channel, Sports Chat 503. Great stuff on Oregon football. He loves the Ducks and knows his stuff, and that's why we bring him on here on a regular basis. And of course, these are the defending Pac-12 champions. That is minus an offensive line. So you mentioned Penei Sewell, and I saw a stat the other night that and it makes sense when you collectively have the most experienced offensive line in the country that has the most starts of any unit in the country, that when they all get taken off the board and move on, that you suddenly have the least experienced, the most inexperienced offensive line in the country with one returning start.
Absolutely. And not to mention that, but the two guards, one of them is a walk-on who just got a scholarship this year, and the other one is a junior college transfer. Both those guys also won Offensive Lineman of the Week in the Pac-12 in back-to-back weeks. So it's really saying something. Cristobal, he's going to have a good offensive line. The guy is just born and bred offensive lineman. And then, the coach Mirabal is a great offensive line coach, great teacher. He was a former high school teacher. I mean, the guy really knows his stuff. And so I think that the tactician aspect of it is one thing. The other side of it is the size. These guys are bringing in dudes that are absolutely large. I mean, the freshman who just came in, Feope, is one of the largest humans we've probably ever seen on the football field. He's like 6'8", almost 400 pounds. So these guys are going to have to trim down a little bit, get more active a little bit, but they look really good. A lot of these guys were lying in wait. They had a lot of really good experience on that line. And so there were guys who could have played last year. George Moore, Stephen Jones, guys could have played a lot. Big Sala. These guys could have had and Alex Forsyth could have had a lot of plays last year, a lot of minutes, but you had all those seniors there. So they waited their turn. They came out and they look really good.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, best discussion, debate, and analysis. Do we deliver that every day? No, that's our mission, though. That is the goal, Ryan, and we do our very best to deliver on that and bring on the best bloggers, broadcasters, writers in the nation. Hit that bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live, which is every day, multiple times per day. Is there still a bit of juice in facing Chip Kelly, or is that completely worn off?
I think average Duck fans really have a soft spot for Chip. He brought us to some places that the Oregon fans had never been, never even dreamed of going. When I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, we didn't think we were ever going to get back to a Rose Bowl. And here we go, and we go to multiple BCS, Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, whatever the case may be. So, yeah, there's a lot of love for Chip. There's also kind of maybe some resentment from some fans that think that he should have stuck it out. But when the NFL calls, you got to go. So I have no hard feelings against Chip. And I kind of think that his offense, even though it's still potent, it's nothing like it was when it was at Oregon. He was really doing some avant-garde stuff that people have kind of caught on with a little bit. And I think that you still have to play football. You still have to have power. You still have to have good technique. And sometimes it feels like there's some of those aspects missing with Chip's offense, where he doesn't necessarily go with the power. He may not look at exactly the technique because he's just going to try to outrun you. But he's had some success. Last week's game against Cal was pretty impressive. Cal came into this season as being one of the higher ranked teams in the North, and obviously had a tough time the first week with COVID. They had a game canceled. Then they had to switch it up, and they had to play against UCLA, probably not prepared. Again, like you said, 48-hour notice on that game. But Cal did not look good in that game against UCLA, and UCLA looked really good. So I think Oregon's got their hands full this weekend.
I think what Chip Kelly accomplished at Oregon now, since he's failing at this point at UCLA, had a couple of rough stops at Philadelphia and San Francisco, that it's been a bit lost nationally, looking back now that it's been almost 10 years. But anybody go back and just look at the records. It's astonishing. 33-3 in the Pac-12 over 4 seasons, finished in the top 5 every season. BCS championship game, came within a field goal, final seconds of beating Auburn to win a national championship. Just set up, obviously, it for a 2014 national championship game run as well. What he accomplished there was amazing. And now just the thought process of, how ahead of the curve was he at that point? Is he somewhat outdated or just another football coach now, and everybody's doing what he established or helped to establish? And it's kind of fascinating because I've looked up a few things since we did some UCLA pregame and postgame last week against Cal, and now with this game against Oregon, looking into his tenure and what he did. And it's interesting to note that the Eagles and Niners, quickly after he left, both go to a Super Bowl as well. So Chip Kelly, still at UCLA, off to a decent start, got knocked around by Colorado in the first half, came back and made it a game. And then they, as Ryan pointed out, against Justin Wilcox's program, which I've got a lot of respect for him. He does a great job at Cal. UCLA looking impressive in that one. Everybody talks about the college football playoff. We've got to address it, even though I think it's completely just consumed the sport, unfortunately. But considering what you achieved and that you came down to a game against Arizona State in upset fashion from getting to a playoff last year, that being the goal this year, the Ohio State game's taken off the table. But the conventional thought is that Oregon, really a Pac-12 team, but the candidates are Oregon and USC, would have to go undefeated. How much of a mindset is that for Oregon fans?
I think there are a lot of fans that are kind of national championship or bust. Like you said, I think it's kind of consumed the sport. I think there's a younger fan base that's like, hey, if you're not in the playoffs, you're not really relevant. And then there's kind of the older group that loves the bowls, loves all the pageantry of all the different bowls and opportunities for different teams to end the season on a positive note. I think that's the best part about the bowls. It's hard with the playoff that it dominates, especially something like the Rose Bowl out here historically, West Coast. That's our goal. That's the granddaddy. That's the greatest thing. And so last year it even felt like there was some kind of, a cloud over that a little bit because it should have been in the national championship. Well, hey, you tell that to us when we were in Pasadena on New Year's Day having a great time against the Wisconsin. I think we'd rather be there. But there are a lot of, like you said, a lot of fans who've kind of been consumed by it. I think the first thing first is you got to win your games on the weekend. You got to win your conference championship. Then you can have something to say. The last couple of years, the Pac-12 has not been the best team in the conference or in the country, obviously. Maybe they're the fourth or there's a conversation around fourth, fifth, but they're not in the top 1, 2, 3 spot. With the Big Ten's play, with the ACC, with Clemson, with the SEC, obviously. So, this year, unique opportunity. The way the Big 12 started looked like the Pac-12 might have an opportunity to get themselves in there. And then you got schools like Notre Dame or BYU or other schools knocking on the door. So I think it's really important that, this year, if USC runs the table, if Oregon runs the table, and then USC can play Oregon in that Pac-12 championship game, at that point in time, that's where maybe the conversation then shifts to, hey, well, what about a playoff? Chip Kelly used to say it best. He said, keep your head down all year, and then at the end of the year, look up and see where you stand.
And if we could get into the hearts and minds of individuals, then we could really know what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee is going to approach this as. Meaning, if they're taking perception into account and the eyeball test that the Pac-12 is taken a step back over the last several seasons, then you're already behind the 8 ball or have 2 strikes against you based on playing less games and having the perception that you're the worst or second worst conference. But if they take it as is, you basically have to take all the conferences as equal because they're not playing each other. So there's nothing to base it on. So you basically have to take the conference champion as who's playing the most dominant football against its own conference and select the teams that way if they're taking 2020 as is unto itself.
I completely agree. I mean, that's why I love your top 25 list, because you say it's the truth. It's who played who and who beat who, and it's not just all about perception or numbers. I mean, perfect example is I kind of think right now from the outside looking in that they're either kind of try to put two SEC schools in there or put Notre Dame and Clemson in there. What happens if Notre Dame, Clemson play in the ACC championship and Clemson wins? So I mean, you're in a situation where a lot of things are up in the air. I just think that the Pac-12 was really behind the eight ball, like you said, going into it this year. It was very, very evident that as soon as the Pac-12 wasn't playing, the rest of college football didn't care. And, they wanted the Big Ten as a part of it because they want Ohio State. They want a part of that, but they really didn't care when the Pac-12 said they weren't playing. And so that was pretty evident. Obviously, to us on the West Coast, this is what we care about. We'd rather see the Pac-12 than watch SEC or ACC. No offense to those conferences. This is just a regional situation, and this is what we're interested in. But I do think that Oregon has a real shot at being a consistent contender as long as you continue to have these high-ranking recruiting classes. Again, Cristobal's recruiting classes, every year Cristobal's been here, are the highest recruiting classes of all time at Oregon. So those got to coincide with some wins. Again, we talked about Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly had great numbers, but never really had the recruiting classes to keep the thing rolling. This is totally different. Cristobal's got a completely different level of recruiting, and recruiting at a different level physicality as well. Really transfers over to being able to play against Ohio State or being able to play against an SEC school. The way that Cristobal set this thing up, the strength and conditioning program at Oregon, is completely different than it was during Chip. And people used to talk about that, the fact that they couldn't line up against Auburn face-to-face or couldn't line up against some of the bigger schools like Ohio State face-to-face. I think now it's an opportunity where as long as Oregon does what they need to do on the Pac-12, they should at least be considered at the end.
The Pac-12 still paying the price of Washington getting knocked around in the 2016 playoff and USC by Ohio State and Notre Dame in 2017. That was 3 and 4 years ago. My goodness. Mm-hmm. All right. Rian Winter, Super Chat 503. Please check out his content on Oregon football over there right here on YouTube. Rian, it's always a good discussion. Appreciate you stopping by.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate what you do. Keep the faith, man.